The next thing I would like to add to the app is to store the drawing. So if I draw something here, then I want to be able to store it, and therefore we need to allow the writing onto the device. And once we allow that, permission was granted, and then we click on it again, and then we can see the file was saved on our phone. And yeah, let's get started. As usual, the UI is the easiest point, so the first one where we actually see something. So I'm just going to add another image button just underneath this ID brush, which means next to the ID brush, and I'm gonna call this one IB Save. And then of course we also need to use another image here, so let's drag in another drawable, and it will be the IC Save. So here I'm importing it with copy pasting, and then we of course need to change the image here. So IC Save. Let's just see if this works and if the UI is as we want it to be. So there we are. The button exists. So the button is there. Of course, it doesn't do anything. So the first thing we need to do is to add the permission request, because now we also want to write onto the device and not just read. All right. And in order to write onto the device, we need to know where we want to write. So at which path we want to write. Therefore, I want to create a new path, and I'm going to create a whole new directory in the resources folder. So new and directory, and I'm going to call this one XML. So in here, I'm going to create a new XML, and I'm just going to call this one path. Or maybe even, yeah, path should be fine. Okay, so I'm going to call this path, and it's not going to be a preference screen, but it's going to be some paths. So in here, you can create your paths in this paths file, which is our path.xml file. Maybe you could even call this one paths.xml, because it could potentially have multiple paths in there, but we're just going to work with one, and I'm going to work with an external path. And it needs a name, and I'm going to call this one captured. And then it needs to know where it needs to store it. So usually you would go like Android/data/ and then the package name of your project. So it's this one here at the very top. This one, in my case, eu.tutorials.kidsdrawingapp. Okay, so I add that in here. And then /files. So I'm going to create this entry as an external path here. And then of course we need to close that at one point. Okay, so this is the path that we prepared. The next step is to add a provider to our manifest file. So in here, we already have this user's permission, write external storage, that's good. But now we also need to add a provider, and we do that just underneath the activity within the application. So still in the application, we create this provider. This provider needs authorities, and here I'm gonna use the name again of my package dot file provider. And then you need to have a name as well, and I'm gonna use Android x.core.content.file provider. So that's going to be the name of the provider that I'm using. But we need a little more information inside of this provider, and actually we're going to do it like this because we need to pass in something in there as well. But the provider is not done yet. And by the way, if you want to know more about the provider, it's something that you can look up in the documentation, of course. So inside the app manifest file, you can create a provider. It declares a content provider component, and a content provider is a subclass of content provider that supplies structured access to data managed by the application. All content providers in your application must be defined in a provider element in the manifest file. Otherwise, the system is unaware of them and doesn't run them. Okay, so we need to set that up if we want to store anything on the device. So that's exactly what we're doing here. And then the next thing, I'm going to set exported to false. And what exported does is it indicates whether the content provider is available for other applications to use. So here you can basically say, okay, whatever I'm providing could be used by another application. If I set that to false, the provider is not available to other applications. All right, if you set that to true, the provider is available to other applications. Any application can use the provider's content URI to access it, subject to permission specified for the provider. So yeah, that's basically what you have to take into consideration. And then you also have to have this grant URI permissions. So whether or not those who ordinarily would not have permission to access the content provider data can be granted to do so temporarily, overcoming the restrictions imposed by the read permission, write permission, permission, and exported attributes. True if permissions can be granted, and false if not. Okay, so we're going to set that value to true in our case, because granting permission is a way of giving an application component one-time access to data protected by a permission. Okay, so let's set that up. So exported is set to false, and then we had the grant URI permissions, and I'm going to set them to true. Now in here I can create some metadata, and the metadata that I need to give the provider is of course the resource, and another one is the name. So, and that metadata should have Android name, and here I'm going to use android.support.file underscore provider underscore paths, and the actual resource will be our XML path. So add xml.path. So it's going to be this path.xml file, which is in our path called XML. So it's within the resources in the folder XML. And that's what I'm accessing here. So now that we have figured the path stuff out and the provider stuff, which is required in order to provide anything or in order to even store anything, the next thing we need to do, and by the way, of course, the authorities, so if you want to know more about the authorities, it's a list of one or more URI authorities that identify the data offered by the content provider, and typically it's the name of the content provider subclass that implements the provider. As it states here, there is no default, at least one authority must be specified. So in our case, we say that the file provider of our drawing app should be the one being used. Okay, now let's go back to coding in our main activity. Because now what I would like to have is to get a bitmap from our view. Because if we look at our game or our app, here this whole area is a view. And now I would like to go ahead and make a bitmap out of it, because bitmaps are images, and bitmaps and images, they can be stored. Views themselves cannot be stored, so I need to convert it into a bitmap. In order to do so, I'm going to create a new function here. And I'm going to do that a little further down here. And this function that I'm going to create is going to be a private fun get bitmap from view. And we need to pass in a view because I want this to return a bitmap. Okay, so the idea is we get a view and we return a bitmap. And we need to import bitmap here in order for this to work. And of course, we need to return a bitmap in the end. And the bitmap that I want to return is going to be returned bitmap. So at least I'm going to call it like that. Returned bitmap is going to be bitmap.create bitmap. And here this create bitmap, if we look at it, there are so many different versions here. And I want to use one where I pass in the width. So the width of the view, view.width, then the height of the view, view.height, and then the bitmap type. So the bitmap configuration. So here bitmap.config.argb and 4/8. Okay, so let's put that in another line, so it's a little more readable. So I'm creating this return bitmap, and I'm calling that return bitmap because I'm going to return it. All right, and it will take the whole width of the view, the whole height of the view, and it will take the configuration of ARGB 888. And we saw that earlier, which pretty much just is a type of defining how many colors we want to have, and also defining which type of opacity we want to have. Okay, the next thing is that we want to bind the canvas that is on the view, so pretty much the thing that we drew. And in order to do so, I'm going to create another variable. I'm going to call this one canvas. It's going to be a canvas, and it will take in the returned bitmap. So let's import canvas here as well. And then of course we also need to get the background. So overall, if we look at this image that we have here, we can have a background, right? For example, we can have our Homer being in the background. So let's use Homer once again. So then Homer will be the background of the view. The view itself is going to be the thing that contains our canvas, and on the canvas is where we have all of our colors. And the bitmap is going to be the combination of those three. So putting them all together and making one image out of it. It's like putting them into a sandwich maker, and you have all of those layers, and now you're making one sandwich out of it, and you can eat it. Okay, so that's what we're going to do here. And therefore we also need to know the background. So bg drawable, which is view.background. So whatever we assigned as background, it can be that there is nothing, but it can be that it's the image that we just used Homer Simpson for. And if it's nothing, so if it's nothing, we want to do nothing. But if it is something, then we want it to draw on the canvas. Otherwise, I want to have a white background. So the canvas should be draw color white. So color.white. And here we need to import color as well. Just like that. Okay, so now we draw something. No matter if we have a background image or not, we now draw a background, and then we need to draw the canvas onto the view. So draw canvas, and finally we can return our returned bitmap. So here return bitmap. And by the way, by running this line, what we do is pretty much finalize the thing, because what we prepared is our returned bitmap, right? Which is taking the view's width and the view's height. And we then go ahead and we prepare the canvas a little more. We put in the returned bitmap into the canvas. We get the background. If there is a background, we draw that onto the canvas. If there's no background, we draw white onto the canvas. And then we draw the canvas onto our view. And finally, we return our returned bitmap. All right, and at this point, we are almost done. What we need to now prepare is a bitmap async task. And this is a little bit of code. So I'd say let's make a break here and finalize that code in the next video. So see you there.